problem with behavior change in medicine comes down to this thing called compliance or adherence, right? It's whether or not you're following your doctor's orders, whether or not you're taking your pills, and many times, pretty much people are usually not, right? I mean, most people don't do what they're supposed to do. This is the essential riddle of medicine. How do we get people to do what they're supposed to do? And how do we talk about that in a way that isn't actually using this terminology? We're not talking about adherence or compliance because these are binary things, right? You're either doing it or you're not. And you're probably not, right? You're probably failing. And that kind of dialogue, that kind of rhetoric, is really not something that's good at the soft stuff. It doesn't really offer people a way in. It's hostile, in fact. It's for patients, for the individuals who are experiencing this kind of information barrage, all these things that they're supposed to be doing. This is a very hostile and antagonistic way to think about their lives. So the opportunity that we're at is to reframe it, to think about behavior and to think about engaging people in a different way. So I want to start with a study. I like to sometimes go into research and pull out studies that wrestle with this thing, this subject. And one of my favorite areas of medicine is dentistry, because it's really quite boring when you think about it. It's pretty cut and dry. People are supposed to brush and floss their teeth, and largely people do, though not as much as they're supposed to do. In fact, for a curious dentist, an intellectually curious dentist, the kind of mundaneness of the discipline offers a whole lot of opportunity for experiments. And this was an experiment that happened a few years ago in Connecticut, where they decided that they wanted to see if they could get their patients to brush and floss more often. So they thought they were going to kind of play with some of the things that we traditionally use to get people to engage in their health. Fear, right? They wanted to see if they could scare people into brushing and flossing their teeth. So they set up a kind of duality. They had a low fear group where they kind of gave them some exposure to what they need to do, why they should brush and floss their teeth, but they didn't really lay it on that thick. They kind of made it seem to be cut and dried. The worst case scenario, they said, was if you don't brush and floss, you're going to get gum disease, in which case your teeth will fall out, but it'll be okay. You'll get dentures and you'll go on through your life. Then at the other extreme, they had the high fear group, okay? And the high fear group, there was no holds barred. They showed them nasty slides, nasty pictures of people with horrible teeth. They talked about infections that were going to spread from their gums to other parts of their bodies. And they said, yes, your teeth will fall out if you do not brush and floss your teeth. And when that happens, you're going to get dentures. And when you get dentures, say goodbye to apple pie, say goodbye to apples, say goodbye to steak, say goodbye to carrots. You're going to be eating mush for the rest of your life. Brush and floss your teeth. Right? So that was the high fear. So they measured one other thing. There's one other thing that they wanted to measure while they had these people. They asked them at the beginning, do you think you're inclined to change your behavior? Just kind of, what do you think you might be able to do? And this is basically something called self-efficacy, and these people broke into kind of two groups. There was a high-efficacy group who felt, yeah, I'm pretty good at following my doctor's orders. I'll probably be able to stick with this program, brushing and flossing. And then there was a low-efficacy group that probably said at the beginning, you know, I'm not so inclined to brush and floss. I'll probably not be able to stick with it as well as I should. So that was something they measured at the beginning, but they weren't trying to manipulate that. They were manipulating fear. So here's what happened. After 3 months, it turned out that fear wasn't the driver at all for sustained behavior change. In fact, it really wasn't all that corresponded to what was really driving people to change their lives, to actually brush and floss their teeth. What was corresponding here was this idea of efficacy. Before the study even began, if the people thought that they were going to be able to stick with the program, they probably did. And if they didn't have that sense of confidence at the outset, they probably didn't. So fear doesn't work, right? And there's been plenty of other studies that have shown the same effect. Fear doesn't really work to get people to change their behavior. There's a short-term effect, certainly. But in terms of long-term, sustained life changes, fear is not a driver. And yet, how do we talk about health, right? You should do this, you shouldn't do this. We use fear and anxiety. It's this great paradox, right? We want people to kind of live better lives, and so we use our worst possible emotions to try to get them. Now, efficacy, on the other hand, this kind of notion of efficacy is quite fascinating, and it's something that was isolated and identified in the 60s and 70s by a fellow at Stanford, Albert Bandura. It's really another way of saying, do you believe that you can change, right? Do you believe that you have the capacity to change? And it manifests itself in all sorts of behaviors, not just health behaviors, but in health in particular. You could phrase it as, do you see a path to better health? Can you see your way to better health? And that's a very powerful notion. It's a very powerful thing that again and again has been shown to work for people, getting people to change their lives. But the problem is that it's hard to kind of kick into effect, right? We understand that it works, but we haven't understood so well how to get it to happen. So I want to get at a way that perhaps we can change that. And I didn't invent